right, my good AP friends. This is Mr. Davis. This is Monday. I'll make this Ed puzzle due on Wednesday at 9 p.m. So what we're doing is we were talking about Unit 5. Unit 5 and 6 are pretty interchangeable. They're like basically the last huge unit. It is like the revolutions, scientific revolution, and the Enlightenment, and then like the actual war revolutions. Probably what you think about when you think of the word revolutions, like the French Revolution, the American Revolution, the Haitian, and the Spanish. There's some other little ones around the globe as well. And then the Industrial Revolution. So it's like all kinds of different types of revolutions that they combine in Unit 5. And then Unit 6 is like once these huge countries like have empires. Unit 6 is about imperialism and going out and getting resources, and then unfortunately these big nations imposing their will on the little countries around the globe. So we are talking about Unit 5 right now, but I've been reading some of your DBQs, and we're doing a good job. I love the formula you're following. One thing I do want to talk about is outside evidence, and I'll probably put like a question in the Ed puzzle here. But my tips on outside evidence is I pray that we get context correct, and I pray that we get outside evidence correct, because that's just our organization. Now, if you've noticed in your AP exam folders, I've been making spice charts for Units 1, Unit 2, Unit 3, Unit 4. I haven't filled them out. I'm debating on making that a homework assignment. I've filled a little of them out. Like, for example, let me just show you this real quick. If I go to Unit 4 spice chart, okay, so what I've done is I've made this spice chart for Unit 4, and in front of every like chart, I've given you context of what's going on in this time period. So you have this. This is in your AP test folder. So what I might do is have one row do Spain and one row do Portugal, England, France. This is from the Age of Exploration unit, or also known as the Maritime Empires. What I've put down here are dates that kind of go hand in hand with Maritime Empire, such as Jean Ha's last voyage, the Far Morrow map in 1450, Columbus exchange begins 1492, Montezuma is killed in Tenochtitlan, Suleiman takes over the Ottoman Empire. That wouldn't really fit for Unit 4. Magellan dies in the Philippines, who's the guy that circumnavigated the world. The Incas, there's dates all over these spice charts. So I pray that we can get context correct, and we can get our context and outside evidence correct. Now, one thing I noticed when I was reading some of your outside evidence cannot be, I should say, it shouldn't be a fact. Like, don't tell me that this, like, if an outside evidence was the Spaniards were, ruthless to the Incas. Give me a date, a fact, a name, because you cannot dispute a name. You cannot dispute that, like for the Industrial Revolution, if you get a essay about that, you can't dispute the fact that Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin in like 1793 or something like that. I'll put the right date. You can't dispute that fact. So that's evidence, and it's not an opinion. What you then have to do is say, because Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin in 1793, it provided more and more cotton to the factories, meaning that they needed more and more workers. Thus, they turned to child labor, instead of saying child labor was harmful on the society, because somebody could argue that child labor was good for society. So hopefully you see the difference between using hard evidence and using like an opinion. Okay, so I don't want us to lose evidence. I don't want us to lose any points for tips on outside evidence. So I've shared with you. Now, if I go to the AP exam folder. Okay, so exam review. If you just type in AP exam review, I have like thousands of docs. You probably do not have that money because you're only a sophomore. But here's all kinds of stuff. Now, like we have a cheat sheet. A cheat sheet. You'll have cheat sheets for every unit. Okay, so it's not when you get your DBQ, it's not going to tell you. I don't know why that went there, but it's not going to tell you that we are talking about Unit 4. Let's just assume that you know that when uh, when the essay is about maritime empires or the age of exploration, etc. Um, Sorry, I'm just struggling with this just a little bit. Okay. So, like, you would want to, now, if I were you, I would have this stuff printed off. Unfortunately, we're not at school. But I would have this printed off rather than like on your computer. I wouldn't want to be messing around with my computer going from document to document. I want stuff printed out. Um, so I could flip through it that way rather than because like who knows, like maybe you would X out of like the document you're working on. That would be pretty awful. But here are just all kinds of outside evidence, dates, and definitions are really good, like the tobacco being created in North America made the need for slaves even greater. Tobacco is made in North America, and they use slaves to grow it. So right here, tobacco could be used as outside evidence. Also, be sure, like, if you're talking about if it's some source, I don't know, on something, make sure your outside evidence doesn't necessarily have to do with that source, because you just don't want to double out outside evidence. But here is really, this is a good cheat sheet. And again, you're allowed to use your notes. I wouldn't call this cheating. This is just using using the rules to your advantage. So we'll have a unit 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cheat sheet. And so I'll make a little notes of like what years um, the different units are in. So like units 1 and 2, just if I just quickly just typed it out, units 1 and 2 equal 1200, 1450. Units 3 is 1450 to 1750. So this is units 3 and 4. And then units 5 and 6 is 1750 to 1900. Okay, so like if you, and also remember, like when they say like the 18th century, they're talking about the 1700s. Okay, so like the century is always one past the hundreds, if that makes sense. So like if they say 16th century, they're talking about the 1500s, because the first century was 0 to 99. So if they're not going to say units 3, they're going to say in maritime trade, etc. So you'll know they're talking about 1450. And then if you're organized and you know that you have some dates here somewhere showed up, I'm kind of bouncing around all over the place, but I got so much stuff up. But like in the spice chart, I gave you these facts. Okay, so if you know you're talking about like Spanish takeover of America, you could say, you talk about in 1520 Montezuma was killed in Tenochtitlan, and Montezuma was the monarch, and it showed you that it didn't matter who the Aztec person was. The Spaniards didn't recognize any king or queen. They were just an enemy to them. Okay, so do the same thing with the Incas and Pizarro, etc. Okay, so we want hard facts. So lean away from opinions. Opinions are for what you're going to argue, but evidence is like a hard fact, a name, a date, an invention. Okay, because you can't dispute that Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, that Eli Whitney created the cotton gin, that James Watt made the steam engine, Thomas Edison makes electricity, which made factories stay open longer, etc., etc., etc. So you want hard evidence, because a lawyer, because you guys are lawyers now, it is not going to, they can't just give you their opinion the whole time. They have to give you facts if they want the jury to rule in their favor. So they need evidence, cold, hard evidence. So that is just my thing, because it's easy. You guys know content pretty well, I think, at this point. I just don't want you to. I don't want you to, get a 5 out of 10 when you could easily have gotten a 7 out of 10 and you've been safe. So just be mindful. Also, be really, really imperative that you are paying attention to the College Board's emails. Do not miss any emails. I'll try to keep you updated as well. Okay, some other great things. I'm seeing you guys start paragraphs off with great topic sentences, which is great. You're arguing with the docs, which is great. You're using therefore, which proves that you're arguing. And then I also say hip rather than conclude. If you have a little bit of time left and you hip 2 documents, it's probably better to go through and hip a 3rd document in case you didn't do it correctly on one of the docs. It's probably better to do that than even to add a conclusion. Okay. So that's just my little tips for today. And the HIPP, the historical context, intended audience, point of view, purpose. You just really, I have you go through all the HIPP. If they can tell that you are going through that and you added a correct fact, you'll get the point for that. So don't skip over the HIP, because you can get 2 points for that. I really think if they give you a topic that you're familiar with, the way I'm seeing in writing, some of you guys could knock this out of the park. So let's talk about the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is a difficult topic. I wouldn't say I would be surprised if the Enlightenment was on here, because there's only one lesson was on the Enlightenment. But so would it kind of surprise me. But revolutions were inspired by the Enlightenment. So I could see how an industrial revolution or just a democratic revolution is on there, or comparing and contrasting revolutions. Maybe they'll talk about compare the success of the American Revolution to the French Revolution, or compare and contrast the Industrial Revolution with, I don't know, something else. So the Enlightenment was not a huge topic. It was a little bit difficult to come and soak up all these names that they were giving us, all these, because they were like French names, like Rousseau and Voltaire, that kind of stuff. So the Enlightenment was it was a hard topic for me to teach. But the Enlightenment here says a movement taking ideas from basically from the Renaissance and the scientific revolution. There were changes. They were valuing reason over faith. So if they had you compare and contrast the Muslim world with the European world at this point, and the big thing that's changing and that's different is that the Muslims continue to let the Quran be the dictator of their education. Where after the Crusades, we're going to start seeing universities rise up, and we're going to see education outside the monasteries. And so that's a big change in the education. And outside of the church, you're going to see these thinkers come together, and they're going to question the church a lot. They're going to have the freedom to question the church. And so, some of the Enlightenment thinkers will become atheists. Some of them will remain Christian and Catholic. They'll just challenge the fact that, for example, like the King of England is the head of the Protestant church. Why should a king be telling me about God when God is between me and God? Okay, so they're going to question a lot of things, and they're going to particularly question the church, because the church has always kind of maintained, even up to Isaac Newton, that the earth was the center of the universe, and they challenge anybody that challenged any science on that fact. So After the Crusades and the Renaissance, we start seeing universities pop up, and we start seeing different ideas pop up, like socialism. Socialism is a worker owns the means of production, and everybody shares in the profits. Liberalism means that, like, you're trying to change government for the most part. You're trying to change society. You're trying to change the fact that the church has so much power, or you're trying to change the fact that the government taxes its people but doesn't give them a voice in in voting on laws, etc. The term conservatism, that are people that like things to stay the way they are. They like things the status quo. Usually the monarchs very conservative. Yeah. Monarchs would not like liberal ideas because for the most part liberal ideas means that you want to take the monarch's title away from them. Now, and then nationalism comes up as a fierce loyalty to those who share your customs and languages. Nationalism comes up a lot in the bigger empires, like the Ottoman Empire. Maybe not so much in the Mughal Empire, but like Haitians. The Haitians are part of the French Empire, so you see a nationalist movement to get rid of the French. And the Ottomans, you're going to see smaller states that want to get rid of the Ottomans ruling over them. The capitalism comes into play when we're talking about the Industrial Revolution. And capitalism is a free market society, and they say that individuals will make the society great and profitable because they will be competitive with one another. It's better for the individuals to have the power rather than the state. Like a great example of capitalism would be the United States and England compared to Russia. Russia owned all the means of productions, and the serfs worked, but they didn't get anything. Whereas in the United States and Britain, you saw factory workers, you saw guys like Henry Ford and Alexander Graham Bell, be rewarded for individual thinking. A big thing that we talked about in this thing was feminism. Now, even though we have all these movements, the women are still going to be at the fighting tooth and nail to get any seat at the table, to get any respect. Mary Wollstonecraft is one famous British thinker who said basically the men have always told us that we're inferior, but the only thing that's different between us and men is an education. Olympia de Gouges from France, she will make a rights of women in France, and I'll put in the title that she made. But she's saying this whole great French Revolution, they're only fighting for the men. So who's fighting for the women? So there's going to be feminist movements. Unfortunately for the women, they get few victories, but still today we're still fighting for women's equal rights in countries. Deism means God exists but does not ordain. Sometimes deism, they believe, like they say, thinkers believed in God, but they don't want the monarch to tell them about what God believes and that kind of stuff. So a deist would kind of be anti like organized church, I guess I would say. Okay, so tons and tons of stuff in here. I don't want to get too bogged down in the woods here. Some Enlightenment thinkers, John Locke, social contract. That's a good, let's just say contract there. So social contract is a pretty easy one to remember. Basically, it says that people make a contract with their leaders, and if their leaders don't follow through, they can vote them out of office. So John Locke influenced Thomas Jefferson when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Hobbes believed in a slightly modified social government, and it's not a coincidence that the United States is modeled after Great Britain. Not only because that's who they were, part of the British Empire, but Great Britain, although they had a monarch, the people did have rights, and there was a parliament. In 1215, piece of outside evidence here, the King John II signed the Magna Carta, which proved that all the way back in the 1200s, people of England were fighting for some form of democracy. So there's some English thinkers here, different philosophies. Now, I would say I wouldn't I would kind of be surprised if a DBQ is all about the Enlightenment, but I don't want to say that and then that's all it is about, because it definitely could be. But you would definitely be well suited to read these first 5 or 6 Enlightenment things, reactions to the Enlightenment. Of course, the people that didn't really like the Enlightenment, like I said before, were like the monarchs didn't like the Enlightenment. The church didn't like the Enlightenment because they were successful before the Enlightenment. So they would be under the conservative viewpoint. They don't want things to change. Where the liberals say, hey, why does the church have all this power and the regular congregation have no power? Why does the monarchy have all the power, have a palace of Versailles, tax everybody, but the people paying the taxes have no rights? So, you know, that is that. So I would go through this um, and talk about this. If there is something about the Enlightenment, there's definitely going to be a document from women fighting for their voice. So people like I said before, Mary Wollstonecraft wrote "Vindication of the Rights of Women," where she argued women have the same rights to an education as men. These writings inspired the 1848 Seneca Falls Convention. The Declaration of Sentiments was announced and said women should have the right to hold office, property, manage their money, be legal guardians of their children. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was the champion of the Seneca Falls Convention later on, but it takes 1920 where the women get the right to vote. Right? So feminism was a movement for women's rights of equality and suffrage. So like if there was something about Enlightenment, like this slide right here would be pretty much be all these facts would be on the cheat sheet. Okay, so some other things. Feminism was a reaction to the Enlightenment. Also, abolitionism was a reaction to the Enlightenment. And now we're seeing what's going on is these people that are challenging the state, they're going to realize if we challenge like the king and queen to have this power, like they shouldn't have this absolute power over everyone. Why should slavery exist? Why should there be men and women and children be given no rights, shipped across the Atlantic to the Americas to be in chains their whole life? So we see an abolitionist movement going on. They're going to fight for the end of the slave trade. An important year for slavery is the slave trade. The Atlantic slave trade ends in 1808. But slavery in America continues to 1865 when the American Civil War ends. In the late 1880s, Brazil finally ends slavery. So an abolitionist movement, you're going to see peasant revolts, and we're kind of across the board. I'm just trying to go fast, and that's why I'm kind of depending on you to read these slides to jog your memory, not to remember who French Dreyfus affair was, but just jog your memory about what the abolitionist movement was about. We didn't talk about Zionism that much, but Zionism is after centuries of anti-Semitism, which is hatred towards Jews around Europe. Jewish people pushed to have their own homeland, led by Theodor Herzl, a Jewish military, and then Europe had not been a safe place for Jews, and the French Dreyfus affair solidified this. A Jewish military officer was framed for crimes against the state, framed to build distrust against the Jewish faith. So just go ahead and read that about the Jews there, and Zionism is basically trying to give the Jews their own homeland. And this is well before World War II, but eventually Israel is created after World War II as a place for Jews to go back. All right, so this is where the majority of Unit 5 comes from. It comes from all these revolutions, the political revolutions, and then the Industrial Revolution. So the first 4 revolutions we talked about were the American Revolution, and then it's the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, which was part of the French Empire, and the Spanish American Revolutions. And that was basically all these Spanish nations and the Americas fighting against their homeland and all breaking away, because these people in Spain, what was happening, it was the Creoles who were just below the Peninsulares who were fighting against the Spanish to have their own countries. And, for example, Mexico was created because of the Spanish American revolutions. All right, so the American Revolution, like maybe you get something about how did Enlightenment thinking inspire the American Revolution or Atlantic revolutions. Now, the Americans, they were somewhat of the anomaly because, and I hate to say I wouldn't say it was peaceful, but they ended up with a democracy. This is one of the few revolutions that actually ended with a democracy. What was going on in America was the fact that they were British subjects, yet no one was born in Britain anymore. They were all born in the colonies. People started coming over in the early 1600s with Roanoke and Jamestown, and now we're 1776, so almost 200 years later. So these people are born in the colonies. They don't have that same feel for the British Empire anymore. Let me just see what slide number we're on right here. We're on 11. So they don't have that same feel for the British Empire. Including George Washington, who was a redcoat, and he wanted to keep going up in the British Army, but he got stopped. He hit the glass ceiling of being born in the colonies. So the big cause of the American Revolution was that in 1754 to 1763 was the French and Indian War in America, and that was the French and Indians versus the Americans and the British, and the Americans and the British win. But the British are deeply in debt. And to pay for that debt, they taxed the colonists, something that they hadn't done before. The colonists were ticked because they didn't get any representation. So long story short, because of the Enlightenment principles of not having a voice in the government, they break away. Thanks to Thomas Paine's common sense, thanks to John Locke's social contract theory, thanks to writings by Thomas Jefferson and a leader named George Washington, they break away and they're successful. It's a war. Tons of people die, which I'll try to include a fact there. But when the war is over, it is a pretty stable government. They do have some uprisings. They have some farmers who cannot pay their bills and they revolt against the government. There's some bloodshed and people die after the American Revolutionary War. But it is pretty amazing what America turned into. There's also some little wars in here. Great Britain annexed New Zealand, resulting in an increased control over the Maori tribes. Britain had so many little territories around the world that there's some resistance movements against Britain. I think this DBQ is going to be more a broad topic than like picking out little individual facts. But even if you got like a writing about like somebody who fought in New Zealand against the British, you should be able to realize that these territories are fighting against like an empire that lives thousands of miles away. All right, so the American Revolution. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to ask one of you guys that wrote an outline for the American Revolution to submit it to me so that I can give it back to you guys so that we will have an outline on the American, the French, the Haitian, and the Spanish American ones. All right, so the French Revolution. The French Revolution, it is no wonder that the French Revolution occurs right after the American Revolution, because this is kind of an outside fact. Kind of technically, France is called our oldest ally because they came over and helped beat their all-time enemy, the British. So they helped us beat the British, and if it wouldn't have been for the French, good chance we would have lost that war. So they brought over their navy. They brought, most importantly, their skilled generals to help George Washington whoop the butts of these continental soldiers and get them in line and getting them training and learn how to fight. So our revolution inspires their revolution. The difference between the French and the American revolutions is that we are fighting against a tyrannical government 3,000 miles an ocean away. The French are fighting against a monarchy in their own country. This is a much more bloody outcome. This is not successful. They get rid of the king and queen. They get rid of Marie Antoinette and her husband, Louis. and because the famous the people of France are starving, and Marie Antoinette did not say let them eat cake, but they said that she did. And the reason why people are starving is because massive inflation in France, and there was a series of estates. The estates were groups of people, and each estate got one vote in government. And it was the first estate was I don't know if this slide has it on there, but the first estates were like the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners. Um, the clergy was in the first estate. The second estate was the nobility, and 97% of the people in France were in the third estate. They were the commoners. And every time there was a tax passed, the commoners got outvoted by the clergy and the nobility. So every time there was a tax, the commoners were the only ones that had to pay the tax. And they got jacked up and they got fired up, and they created their own governing body called the National Assembly. And they said, we're not leaving this Estates General until we get a voice in government. And the king doesn't take them seriously. Now, the difference between the Estates General and Britain had a parliament, and we had a bicameral legislature. The Estates General in France, that was basically just fake. Anytime the king needed to pass a tax, he just called the Estates General, and the clergy and nobility outvoted the commoners 2-1, and then the tax was passed on to the commoners. Okay, but this time what was different is the commoners finally said enough, and they take what was called the tennis court oath. There was a tennis court across the street from the General Assembly, and they say, we're not disbanding, and it turns violent. They stormed the Bastille. The Bastille was a prison, but more importantly, it was a fortress of ammunition. And the French people get weapons and ammunition. They rip down the Bastille brick by brick. They kill the warden. I think there was only like 4 or 5 prisoners in the Bastille that they released. And they come up with their document is called the Declaration of Rights of Man. And you see the Declaration of Rights of Man and not woman in there. And Olympe de Georges, I believe hers is the Declaration of Rights of Citizen. I will double check all those facts. But the king and queen are both going to lose their heads. They're going to go underneath the guillotine. Unfortunately for the French, it gets too crazy. There was no stable figure like George Washington to take over the French. So they had a guy named Maximilien Robespierre, and he led a reign of terror. And basically, it was when we were talking about it in class, it was like one of the most I want to put this like the most oxymoronic phrase of all time. They were called the Committee of Public Safety, and the Committee of Public Safety was supposed to keep the country safe, but they basically just killed anybody that didn't support the revolution. Even being suspected of not supporting the revolution could get with what was called a grape shot, which is a little tiny pistol that had a bullet the size of a grape that they would shoot you in the head if you weren't suspected of supporting the revolution. So the Committee of Public Safety gets so out of control that they even execute, this is a great fact, Maximilien Robespierre under the guillotine. Lying in the weeds is a man from Corsica, and his name is Napoleon. And Napoleon, not a George Washington figure, will take over the government. And unfortunately for the French, they do a total 360. They go from an absolute monarchy to an absolute military dictatorship. So that is, in a nutshell, the French Revolution. So let me just check my time here. All right. I realize that this is a long one, but the AP test is coming up, and this isn't hard work. I just want you guys to go over this. So we'll finish up with the Haitian and the French revolutions here. The Haitian Revolution. The Haitian Revolution was encouraged by the American and French Revolutions. There was also some theories that because the French Revolution was going on, that the Haitians were actually freed themselves. Louis Toussaint Overture was a Haitian and was well versed in the Enlightenment thought, joined the rebellion against slavery. The enslaved Africans and Maroons established an independent government. So this is the first area in the New World to get rid of the Europeans. It actually turned the country upside down. Economically, Haitian was like a boss of a country. It was really, really good. They were making tons and tons of money. Of course, all that money is going to France. It's not going to the people. So they had these big, efficient plantations. After the Haitian Revolution, they go back to like just small farms, and it's not like a economic powerhouse. So just a little bit about the Haitian Revolution. That Louis Overture produced the Haitian Constitution in 1801, gave all people equality and citizenship. Now this is one where the blacks went after the whites in this. He declared himself governor for life. He split the plantations between former slaves and freed black people. He was imprisoned by France and died in 1803. Jean-Jacques Dessalines succeeded Overture and declared Haiti permanently independent. This was the first country in Latin America to make its independence. It was the first black-led country in the Western Hemisphere. It's the only country to permanently be independent as a result of a slave uprising. So that's a great fact, that Haiti was the only country to be permanently independent as a result of the slave empire uprising. French versus the Haitian revolutions, both were encouraged by the Enlightenment, natural rights. The Haitians was led by slaves, and you can make a comparison that the commoners, now they weren't slaves. Their life was not nearly probably as brutal as slaves, but they were kind of prisoner to society in France. All right, and then this is the last one, so I will just go through this, and let me just see real quick. I know this is a little bit longer, but this is grind time, and I'm not really interested. I'm probably just make this 0 points. So if you don't want to do it, you don't have to, but I think you need to. So you guys spend a little bit of extra time. Your classes are probably getting pretty easy. So what was going on in Latin America is the fact that just like in the Americas, nobody was being born in Spain anymore. You had this hierarchy. The Peninsulares were people born in Spain and Portugal. Below them, those were the whites, but they were born in Spanish America. Mestizos were the mix, and the mulattoes were Africans. These are people of mixed African race. It says Creoles owned businesses and were upset at Spain's mercantilistic policies. So basically, they're kind of very similar to the American Revolution. They don't want to pay taxes back to Spain. The Creoles and Mestizos wanted more political power and resented the status of the Peninsulares. Simon Bolivar, which I'll put a picture of him, desires for independence grew amongst the Creole first class. His big thing is called the Letters from Jamaica, and we'll talk about that in a second. They did not want help from the masses. I'm sorry, let me just start over here. Desires for independence grew amongst the Creole class first. They did not want help from the masses, mestizos, the indigenous mulattoes, because of what happened in Haiti. Bolivar was rich and well-versed in Enlightenment ideas. He was a talented war general who fought against Spain, and he wrote the Jamaica Letter, aimed at rich Creoles to join the cause. So that's a good piece of outside evidence if it talks about revolutions. He established the Grand Colombia, wanted to be like the U.S., Wars were expensive in Latin America, suffered, and they do eventually break away from Spain, but you're not going to see that they defeat Spain, but they're not going to be like very well-run democratic nations down here. They're often led by a group of people called caudillos, which were strong local leaders who resisted democratic rules of law. Results of the Creole revolutions, they do get new constitutions. But the social hierarchy, just basically what it does is just removes Peninsulares, and the Creoles are at the top of the hierarchy. Even though slavery was ended, non-Spanish speakers will still deny most rights. Creole class remain the upper class, stay pretty conservative. Women in this part of the world do not get much freedom at all. Go ahead and read the rest of that slide. Now, this is a really important slide. We didn't have time before everything that was going on in the last kind of semester to talk about Italy and Germany, but Italy and Germany get unified in the 1860s and 1880s. Germany becomes much more powerful than Italy does. Italy, if you remember, Italy was a country that lost to Ethiopia. All right, so that is the end of this lesson. Let me go back here. And again, I'm making this 0 points, meaning if you